All right, everyone. Today we will be completing Lesson 8 in Booklet 10. This is the final lesson in the unit, and we will be continuing with mixing, addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. Now, this is just a slightly harder version than the previous lesson because we're throwing in some negatives that weren't there before. You'll see what I mean in a second, but please remember some of our rules that we have so far in this unit. Now, those rules being that first, you handle the multiplication and division from left to right, all of the multiplication and division, and only when you're done that are you going to handle the addition and subtraction also from left to right. The other big rule that you need to remember is how your signs interact when you're multiplying and dividing, right? If both of the signs are the same, such as two positives or two negatives, then the resulting product or quotient is going to be positive. Remember the slot machine idea, right? When they're the same symbol, that's a positive thing. However, when they're different symbols, that's a negative thing. So when you are multiplying or dividing two numbers with different signs, the result is going to be negative. Now, using these rules, we're going to solve this first problem. Performing the correct order of operations, solve the following. Now, remember that I like to deal with these situations first, where you have two signs that are directly next to each other. Now, this positive and negative is going to make a negative, so I can rewrite this problem as negative 15 divided by positive 5 minus 1. Good. Now, step 2 is going to be, or rather step 1, as the note calls it, is going to be handling the multiplication and division. So we are going to calculate negative 15 divided by positive 5 first. Now remember that you have your factor chart to help you. You should be used to using this by now. 15 divided by 5 is going to equal, whoops, I circled the wrong one, sorry. 15 divided by 5 is going to equal 3. So our next line is going to be 3, but remember you have to think, is this a positive or a negative 3? Right? Because one of our numbers, the 15, was negative, and the other, the 5, was positive. The result is going to be negative. So that negative 3 is going to be the quotient, and the negative 1 just carries down. We don't do anything with that yet. Now we're going to go a second time through this problem, and we're going to add and subtract. Here we're subtracting negative 3 minus 1. Remember, you had the really old strategy where we would write negative 3 with 3 minus signs, negative 1 with 1 minus sign, and realize that the answer was negative 4. But you hopefully can handle doing that with just mental math at this point. Okay, these questions are getting a little difficult, so please make sure you're reaching out for help. Let's try the next one. Before I start the problem, I am going to combine this negative and positive to make a negative. So I can rewrite this problem as positive 9 minus 1 times negative 2. Now, step 1, go through the problem and handle your multiplication and division first. Here we're multiplying negative 1 by negative 2. Now, the answer to that is going to be 2, right? Because 1 times 2 is equal to 2. But we have two negatives, meaning that the product is going to be positive. Right? So what happens here is I'm left with a positive 9 plus 2. The plus 2 comes from the product. The positive 9 just carries down. Now, positive 9 plus 2, that's just 9 plus 2. And the answer is going to be positive 11. Okay, let's try a couple more, and then I did create a question that is quite difficult that we're going to solve after this. Now, that question isn't in your notes, so you can just follow along when the time comes or bring out a scrap paper. But for now, let's solve question A. I'm going to take a brief pause here. If you want to pause the video, solve it, and then check your answer with me, that is a good idea. So I'm going to rewrite this problem combining the positive and the negative. That is negative 4 times negative 4 minus 10. Now, step 1 is to work with your multiplication and your division, left to right. So that's negative 4 times negative 4. Remember that if you struggle with multiplication, you can use your multiplication chart, which I have given you. Now, we have two 4's here, and 4 times 4, you find the intersection. That intersection is going to be 16. So this is going to equal 16. Now take a second, decide, is this going to be a positive or a negative? Now, negative 4 times negative 4, those are both negatives, so the result is positive. So this is like positive 16 minus 10, where the positive 16 came from the product, and the 10 just carried down from the previous line. Next, we go through again, and we handle the addition and subtraction. Now, 16 minus 10 is 6. We can do that just using mental math. Okay, let's handle this last problem, right? First thing that I'm going to do is combine those adjacent signs, rewriting this as positive 7. Now, a negative and a positive make a negative, so that's positive 7 minus 6 divided by positive 2. It's a weird looking 2. I'm not going to change it. Now, we go through the entire thing and we solve the multiplication and division first. So that's that division right there. Now, 6 divided by 2 is going to give me an answer of 3. You can use your factor chart to double check that if you would like. One of these was negative, the 6. One of these was positive, the 2. So the answer, the quotient, is going to be negative because those are two different signs. Now, the 7, the positive 7, that's just going to carry down to the next line as so. So now we have positive 7 minus 3, and 7 minus 3 is simply equal to 4. That's your final answer. So remember, I have one more question, so stick around. Just a brief reminder that you don't need a calculator. You should not be using a calculator for this unit. If you struggle with division, use your factor chart. If you struggle with multiplication, then please use the multiplication chart. But also keep working on that mental math. Now, before you go to your worksheet for this lesson, somewhere at the bottom of this page, I believe, yeah, I made this problem, which we don't have too much room for, but I want to try practicing nonetheless. So I strongly recommend pause the video right now. There's a lot going on in this problem. Try and solve it, and then come back and see if your answer matches mine. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take every time that I have two signs next to each other. That happens twice. This positive and negative is going to make a negative. This positive and positive is going to make a positive. So I'm going to rewrite this problem as positive 3 minus 10 divided by positive 2 plus 18 divided by negative 3. Okay, so I've rewritten the exact same line, but I've combined some of those signs to make our life a little bit easier. Next, I'm going to go through the entire problem, but I'm not going to solve the addition or subtraction. I'm just going to solve our division. Oh, we have two divisions. Okay, so we're just going to solve the divisions. Okay, I had meant to make one of those multiplication, but it's too late. I didn't do it. So, this positive 3, he's just hanging out. We don't need to bother him. Negative 10 divided by 2. Well, first of all, that answer is going to be negative because we have one negative and one positive. And 10 divided by 2 is going to give me 5. You're welcome to use the factor chart to double check that. So negative 10 divided by positive 2, negative 5. Next, we have 18 divided by negative 3. Now, I know that this answer is going to be negative because I have a positive on the 18 and a negative on the 3. A positive and a negative make a negative. Now, 18 divided by 3 gives me an answer of 6. Feel free to use the factor chart to double check that. Finally, now that we're done all of the multiplication and division, we are going to go through it again, and we're going to add and subtract. Starting with the positive 3 minus 5. Now, positive 3 minus 5 is going to give me negative 2. We practiced that mental math earlier in this unit, right? The 3 and the 5 definitely make a 2 together after you subtract them. But since the negative is bigger, your answer is going to be negative. So this is negative 2, and that minus 6 just carries down. And with the little bit of room that I have left, I'm going to say negative 2 minus 6 is giving me negative 8. Right? We start with negative 2. We move 6 more in the negative direction. So it becomes negative 8. If you need to, then you can do it this way, right? Remember that we can calculate this the long way using this diagram, right? Where we drew out 2 negatives for the negative 2, we drew out 6 negatives for the negative 6, and we couldn't cancel anything out, so we just counted up the 8 negative symbols. So that's it. That was quite a difficult question. I hope that it made sense. These questions are a little bit simpler, but still quite tricky. Give them some practice, and as usual, if you have any questions, please let me know.